The live chat should be on. Everything should be good. Before, obviously, just like normal, I'm not going to start. Normally. Gonna give us a little bit of time to let people get into the live stream before I start formally. I am currently cooking in the second floor of the house that I'm staying in as of now, and it's not very comfortable, but we're making do with it. So just going to wait a little bit for people to get into the stream before I formally start. This is going to be a review of the draft as opposed to the mock draft that I had last week. Last week I only mocked the first round, so outside of a couple of exceptions, I'm only going to talk about the first round of the draft. Yeah, I need a haircut and a shave, but it's the quarantine, so that first one I don't have that much control over. So we have a few people now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello, ladies and gentlemen of Vanderbilt and the entire YouTube world, and welcome to Terrier Talk Season 2, Episode 36. This is the review of the NFL Draft. These past few weeks, the past month really, every week I've been talking about the draft and the different ramifications, different things I've had on the draft, whether it was the specific prospects, the teams, the free agency moves. Over this past month, I made my mock draft last week, and now I'm going to talk about the draft, of course, that happened in full Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this past week. Now, when I did the mock draft, I only did the first round. And that's for simplicity's sake, really more than anything else. Trying to mock past that sometimes becomes very complicated. So because of that, I'm only going to talk about the first round of the picks. I've been really focusing on those top tier prospects more than anything else. And I think it's the place where I'm going to be able to talk the most about these picks. There are some exceptions, like I mentioned earlier, but for the most part, I'm just talking about those picks. I'm going to talk about the trades that happened both into and out of the first round. I'm going to talk about the picks, the teams that picked them, going 1 through 32. Now, I'm not going to go nearly as in-depth about every pick. There are some picks. I'm going to mention every one. I'm going to mention whether I thought they were a good pick or bad pick. But outside of that, I'm not going to go into big detail with all of them, just a few of the specific ones that I think need to are needing to go into bigger detail. And a couple of those examples of picks that I'm not going to talk about too much are the early ones, because the draft went in a pretty, slang term, chalk way, as people expected. Joe Burrow went first overall to the Cincinnati Bengals, the right choice, the right pick for the team, and no surprise, not much to talk about. Number 2, the Washington Redskins picked Chase Young, the best player on the board, the right pick, no surprise, what everyone thought they'd do. Same thing with number 3, the Detroit Lions. They picked Jeff Okudah. A little interesting thing about that pick, I'm kind of proud of myself for that. I'm super early on into the process, I made a small rough mock draft before the Super Bowl even, and at that point, I had slated Okudah to number 3 long before he became the kind of standard prediction at that point. But as it came close, he became that standard number 3 pick. He was the guy that was picked. It was the right choice, I think, and many others do as well. Good pick for the Detroit Lions. Moving on to the number 4 pick, where things get a little bit more interesting, but also not a huge surprise, the New York Giants selected Andrew Thomas. I don't think many people would say he's the best of the 4 tackles, but he still is one of those 4 tackles, and I don't think it's a big surprise that one of them was taken within this within the Giants pick. I do think, personally, Jedrick Wills is a little bit better, but it's not a bad pick from the Giants. I think it's fine for them. Number 5, the Miami Dolphins, also staying in line with what people thought. They had a bunch of smoke screens. They had a bunch of, are they going to pick Herbert? Are they going to pick somebody else? Isaiah Simmons, someone who knows, maybe an offensive lineman, one of the top flight ones. Many smoke screens, but ultimately the right pick, the pick that had been talked about since the beginning of this past season, was Tua Tagovailoa. It was the right pick for them. They needed a new franchise quarterback, a young franchise quarterback. And that's the pick they made. Not a huge surprise. Some people are surprised by it, and I don't understand why. This was the pick that had been talked about for a long time, and it ended up happening. I think it was the right pick for the Dolphins. After that, starting at number 6, this is where the draft starts getting very interesting. And this isn't a huge surprise to me. I thought the number 6 pick would be the pick that kind of determined the rest of the draft. Because the Chargers really have two options. They could have either picked Herbert, and a lot of picks gained value a little bit, or they could have picked a position player, probably a lineman, and a lot of the picks lost value for that reason. So they ended up, of course, picking Justin Herbert. And I think this is a mistake. I talked about it for the past few weeks. I don't think Justin Herbert is a round 1 quarterback. Could he develop to become the franchise quarterback for Los Angeles? Maybe he could, but he's not going to be better than Tyrod Taylor day 1. Picking him means you are going to roll with Tyrod Taylor this year, more than likely the whole year. And that's fine. He's competent, but I don't know if that was the best selection for them overall. I think if you wanted to do that, I think it's better to shore up a piece to make the team better for Tyrod Taylor, because I think this roster is good enough. If they spent a first-round pick on a position player, my choice was always an offensive lineman. Jedrick Wills was there, of course. Maybe Isaiah Simmons, DePiro, Derwin James, maybe Derek Brown, who knows. If you pick someone like that, I think this seems good enough to make a run at it. Maybe not an AFC West divisional title because of the Chiefs. Maybe not for a Super Bowl, maybe not necessarily, but they could make a run at the playoffs for sure, and who knows what could happen from there. But they didn't do that. And I think this is going to be another year of struggling and not doing that for the Chargers. And I know it's a future pick, and the future is bright. They have a lot of great young pieces. And while the rest of the draft I think was very good, I don't like this pick for the Chargers. I think there was a lot better value they could have gotten at 6. They could have traded down if they wanted Herbert and made a more manageable, reasonable pick in the mid-teens. He would have still been there, more than likely, and gotten value out of it. I think it was a mistake the way they did it. Moving on to the number 7 pick, the Carolina Panthers. Another big surprise. I had slated Isaiah Simmons here for a while. He wasn't going to fall past 7. He was going to get picked by the Carolina Panthers, and then he didn't. He was picked by someone else. Carolina Panthers selected Derek Brown. Really the first big surprise of the draft. It wasn't a big surprise that the Chargers picked Justin Herbert. I just thought that it was a mistake. This was surprising. Him over Simmons, I did not expect this to end up happening. I think Isaiah Simmons is the better player, but I don't think it's a terrible choice to pick Derek Brown. He's still a top 10 player. Maybe he was a little bit underrated. He is, I think, worth a 7th pick in general, but with the board, they could have picked someone better. But I think it fits the team well. I think he's a great player, and he's going to be the cornerstone of that defensive line for a long time. And that Carolina, I think this is a very bright future for Carolina in the next few years. Not this season, but in the seasons to come, I think it's going to be a very fun team to watch. Even without Isaiah Simmons, Derek Brown is still going to be very helpful for this team. At number 8, the Arizona Cardinals made a very interesting choice. Going into the season, their number 1 need, to me, going into the offseason, was offensive line. Their defense needed a lot of help, but to me, at number 8, their best choice was to pick an offensive tackle. So when they picked Isaiah Simmons at 8, as great of a player as Isaiah Simmons is, and he is going to transform that team on defense. As much as all of that is true, I thought this pick was a mistake because they were going to lose so much value at the tackle position. The tackle position this year is not that deep of a position. It's not that deep of a class. And because of that, at 3rd round, by the time the next pick, because of course they traded their 2nd round pick for DeAndre Hopkins, which is an amazing trade. There's no problem with that trade at all from Arizona's standpoint. An amazing trade for them. But they don't have a 2nd round pick. So they can't get someone like Ezra Cleveland in the 2nd round. Theoretically, when you're picking up the 1st round, you have to assume that those guys aren't going to be there. Your Ezra Clevelands, your Josh Jones, your Lloyd Cushenberrys. By the time you get to your 3rd pick, they're not going to be there. So I thought it was a mistake. Then you get to their 3rd round pick, and Josh Jones falls to their 3rd round pick. They pick him up, and they get probably 75-ish% maybe more than that, of one of the top slide offensive tackles in the third round. And the value of this draft absolutely skyrocketed. And now the Isaiah Simmons pick looks like an absolute genius pick because they got so much value for a tackle, a guy that maybe not start day one, but for the future is going to be amazing for the Cardinals and Josh Jones. They got that in the third round while also getting a player that will transform that defense for the next decade. The future of Arizona, outside of the fact that they're in a murderer's row of a division, outside of that fact, this future for Arizona is very bright with an amazing draft. Moving on to the 9th pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars were in a bit of a bad spot. I was expecting one of Derek Brown or Isaiah Simmons to fall to them because I thought more teams would pick offensive linemen, but they didn't. So the Jaguars were faced with two options. Either A, pick a top-flight wide receiver, which I don't think is great for them. They have the talent at wide receiver. B, pick a top-flight offensive lineman. Jedrick Wills is still there. That's probably the choice that I think is best for them. Or C, reach on a defensive player still. I don't think there are any defensive players at this point that are worth a top 10 selection. Maybe Javon Kinlaw. But those are their options. And the choice they end up making is the third one. They pick a defensive player, and I think they pick not even the best defensive player on the board. They end up picking C.J. Henderson, the second corner off the board, of course, after Okudah. And I don't like this pick at all. I think there were places that they could have gotten more value out of. I mocked, of course, last week C.J. Henderson to 13, which I thought was a reach at that point for him in the first place. But I think picking him at 9 is a big reach for Jacksonville. I think it would have been much better specifically to pick Jedrick Wills, or even, I know that they have good talented defensive line, but even someone like Javon Kinlaw would have been better at this point than C.J. Henderson. I don't think he's worth that pick, in my opinion. Moving on to the Cleveland Browns, and they're in an amazing spot, of course. They wanted one of the 4 offensive linemen, and a lot of mocks, including mine. I thought only the 4th one, maybe the one they wouldn't want, would fall to them. Oftentimes Wirfs, sometimes Thomas, but whoever. But 3 of them are still there at pick 10, which is insane. And, well, the one that they probably want the most, Jedrick Wills, is there. So they pick him up. Of course, the right selection. Of course, a great selection for Cleveland. And I just don't understand how he fell this far. The absolute best case scenario for the Cleveland Browns. Moving on to pick 11, the New York Jets. Similar situation. I, as well as many other mocks, didn't mock an offensive lineman, one of the big 4, to fall to New York, so they'd go settle, quote unquote, for CD Lamb more than likely, which I think would still be fine for them. But 2 of the tackles fell, so might as well go and pick Mekhi Becton, their choice of the 2. I think that's a fine pick. I think it's probably the best pick for them at that point, and a very strong pick. I do wonder if they still considered CD Lamb, at this point. But with so much wide receiver depth, I do agree that the tackle pick of Mekhi Becton is the better choice. Moving on to pick 12, the Las Vegas Raiders selected Henry Ruggs over both CD Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. I don't get this at all. I always saw Lamb and Jeudy in a separate tier from Ruggs. Ruggs, of course, in a separate tier from the next guys, your Jefferson, Mims, Rager Chanel, all those guys, Pittman, Ayuk, all the other receivers. I saw them like basically 3 separate tiers in the first round. You had Lamb and Jeudy, the 2 big, should go in the top 15. Ruggs, who will also probably go in the top 15, but should go after them. And then the rest that'll go somewhere in the late first, early second round. That's how I saw the wide receivers. Ruggs really I didn't see him as ever being picked above Lamb or Jerry Jeudy. But apparently the Las Vegas Raiders, the first team that really was in a situation where they had to pick a wide receiver, and they wanted a wide receiver in the first place. I guess they disagreed. They had the choice of all 3, and they picked Henry Ruggs, and I think it's a mistake. I think I really don't get this. Moving on to pick 13, the first trade of the NFL draft this year in the first round. The San Francisco 49ers trade their 13th pick to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the 14th pick, only moving one spot, and a 4th round pick. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are in an obvious position. There's only one player they want at this point, Tristan Wirfs. They are desperately in need of a tackle to help protect Tom Brady. Jameis Winston took something like 40 sacks last season. They need a better offensive line, and I was not expecting there to be a way at all for one of the top 4, one of those top flight offensive tackles to fall to them. And I would totally see them reaching or trading down for someone like Austin Jackson or Josh Jones or Ezra Cleveland, but that didn't happen. Tristan Wirfs fell to 13, and the 49ers saw that they could probably get a pick out of this, traded down one spot, got the 4th round pick. They didn't want Tristan Wirfs more than likely, but the Buccaneers got Tristan Wirfs somehow. I don't get it. All 4 of those tackles, I think, deserve to be picked in the top 10. I thought they would all get picked in the top 10, and then that didn't happen. And Tristan Wirfs somehow fell to the Tampa Buccaneers. Amazing value at 13. Definitely worth much more than the 13th overall pick, and is going to be super valuable for Tom Brady in these next couple of years, the last couple of years of his career. Next, the San Francisco 49ers actually, at pick 14, pick Javon Kinlaw. On the surface, a really weird choice. Of course, they had one of the best defensive lines in the entire nation last year, in the entire league. DeForest Buckner, of course, they traded for this 13th, now 14th overall pick. Nick Bosa, who they just picked last year. Armstrong, D. Ford. That was, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in some ways, it looked like. It was a monster defensive line. So why would they pick again in the defensive line in the first round? Well, I'm going to go ahead and credit someone else I saw talk about this. Brett Coleman specifically mocked Javon Kinlaw to the 49ers in the 13th pick. He didn't mock trades. But he gave a very good explanation as to why he saw this. And my guess is it's the same idea for why the 49ers wanted to pick Javon Kinlaw as well. Reportedly, he was the top person on their board, their whole board. So the idea is they wanted to replace someone. They wanted to replace DeForest Buckner, who was an amazing player, with someone who had the potential to become DeForest Buckner, maybe had better potential than Buckner did theoretically coming out of college. Javon Kinlaw had a monster Senior Bowl, rocketed up in stock after that, and arguably is a top 3 defensive lineman in the entire class, is probably the 3rd best defensive lineman in the whole class. Maybe should be belonging in that tier with Derek Brown. And they can do that, keep a strength with another top flight cheap salary. That's the big thing. DeForest Buckner is just too expensive to keep with so much of this team. This team's very young. The thing is, with very young teams that are very good players at very high draft picks, people like Nick Bosa, they're going to get expensive over a few years. Eventually, you're going to have to pay these guys. Eventually, you're going to have to pay Nick Bosa. Eventually, you're going to have to pay all of these players, all these great players. But now, by picking Javon Kinlaw, you keep a major strength in the defensive line, a major cheap strength for a longer period of time, which is super important. And while picking a wide receiver might have been a very good pick here, Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb both falling to them, I did not see happening at all. The thing is, you're not going to get 80% of Javon Kinlaw or 70% of Javon Kinlaw in the 3rd round or the 5th round. They don't have any mid-round picks other than the 4th they just traded for. But you could theoretically get decent value, maybe not 70% or 80%, but you could get a worthwhile, maybe not starting caliber day 1, but someone who deserves to be on an NFL football field at the wide receiver position in round 5, round 6, round 7. The wide receiver depth is absurd in this draft. So not picking a wide receiver here is understandable. Was it necessarily the best pick? I'm not sure. You could argue that maybe still the value from CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy on this roster, especially after the Emmanuel Sanders trade, is better than Javon Kinlaw, but I can definitely understand why they ended up making the pick. And in the long run, I think it's going to help them a lot. Moving on to pick 15, the Denver Broncos. Well, I always thought it was going to be Henry Ruggs. I thought both Jeudy and Lamb would be gone by this point, as did many other people. But instead, the only one of the three that is gone is Henry Ruggs. And that leaves the Denver Broncos in a surprising and great situation. They end up picking Jerry Jeudy, the right choice. He fits as a complement to Cortland Sutton, better than CeeDee Lamb does. I don't think they mind, especially after picking up a nice discount Henry Ruggs and KJ Hamler in the second round. And that is a great trio of wide receivers for Drew Lock. Drew Lock at this point with Cortland Sutton as the big possession receiver, Jerry Jeudy is the great get open on third down route running receiver, and KJ Hamler as their speed deep threat, and Noah Fant as a tight end, has no excuses this season. No injury, no rookie season, still a great defense, have all the pieces you need. Go win, Drew Lock. If you're a franchise quarterback, he's going to succeed this season. Not like win the Super Bowl or anything, not win the division. No, but he has to show that he can be a franchise quarterback this season if people are going to start believing in him. Moving on to the 16th pick, the Atlanta Falcons make a big reach at cornerback, in my opinion. They pick A.J. Terrell from Clemson. Now, he's a very good player. I think he's maybe more of a late round one pick, but there were still so many great corners at this point on the board. Of course, the top two were gone. But after that, Trevon Diggs, Christian Fulton, Jalen Johnson, and Jeff Gladney are all still there, and you're picking A.J. Terrell. He's not a bad player again, maybe a late round one pick, potentially, depending on how the board falls. But I just don't think he's worth it at 16 with so much better value on the board. Moving on to pick 17, the Dallas Cowboys. Somehow, CeeDee Lamb falls to the Dallas Cowboys. How? How did he fall to 17? This was the last true top-flight talent left on the board. There were probably about 10-ish players, 10 to 12 players, that I would consider those top-flight talent players. Burrow, Tagovailoa, the 4 tackles, those 2 wide receivers, maybe you can count Ruggs as well, and a few defensive players, your Derek Browns, Chase Youngs, Jeff Okudas, those guys. Those are, in my opinion, those were the top flight talents in this draft. He was the last one to get picked, and he somehow fell to 17. I don't get it. Again, this is where I mocked CJ Henderson. Or no, I mocked, I don't remember, Trevon Diggs. I saw them reaching for a corner here, but instead they get so much value from CeeDee Lamb that, of course, it was the right pick. It was obviously the best pick for them. There was nowhere near the same value they could even dream of getting with any other pick at this point. It was definitely the right pick for them. But at this point, similar to Drew Lock, the weapons Dak has this year, he has no excuses. CeeDee Lamb is going to be great. He's going to be a great complement for Amari Cooper, even if they're not similar wide receivers. Lamb's more elusive, Cooper's a little bit bigger, but maybe there are 2 wide receivers that could be a more complementary tandem. But even with that, Lamb is so valuable at 17 that there was no choice with picking anyone else at this point. I can't believe he fell to their lap. Moving on to pick 18, the Miami Dolphins select Austin Jackson. I got this one right in the mock. I'm proud of that one. But it makes sense. One of the top 2 tackles in this class after the big 4 go off the board, and they couldn't expect one of them to fall that far. The fact that one of the big 4 fell to the Bucs is remarkable in the first place. And I think he's going to be solid in the long run to protect the rather, of course, injury-prone Tua Tagovailoa. Moving on to the number 19 pick, the Las Vegas Raiders. They pick Damon Arnett from Ohio State. Now we're starting into the players that if I didn't talk about them, like if they went higher than I thought, they could start being players that I didn't talk about at all, whether they were in the prospect review or in the mock draft. This is one of those players. Damon Arnett was not on my radar very much at all because the cornerback depth in the mid to late round 1 I thought was too big for someone like him to get into the first round. but apparently the Raiders picked him this early again. Those names, the same names that I talked about with Atlanta, are still there. Gladney, Diggs, Fulton, and Johnson still there. And he went above all 4 of them. I don't see it. I don't rate him as that high of a wide receiver. I thought this was a big reach. He's solid. He's going to help the defense, of course. But I think it's a big reach and they could have gotten so much more value. Moving on to pick 20, the Jacksonville Jaguars. They picked Caleb Von Chasson. Both he and Patrick Queen I find to be pretty overrated. I talked about them a lot extensively in the LSU video as well as in different prospect overviews. I feel like he's going to be overpowered a bit in the NFL. I think this is another bad reach for the Jaguars on defense. In better situations with better drafts, they could have transformed their defense. But I don't think they did that with this first round. They had 2 picks, and I feel like they reached on both of them. And I feel like this defense is less effective than it could have been. Those picks could have been Derrick Brown and Christian Fulton. Now, not in the real world, Derrick Brown didn't fall to 9, but theoretically, that's what we're looking at as best case scenario. And instead, we get C.J. Henderson and Caleb Von Chasson, and I just don't think that's as good a value. Henderson's better than Christian Fulton, sure, but I just don't see the same value from the 2 picks they got than from the picks they could have gotten, even if they went to a different position group to get better value. Moving on to number 21, the Philadelphia Eagles. The closer we got to the draft, the more and more people talked about this being the destination for Justin Jefferson. And it made perfect sense going up to the draft. Even at number 21, he was the best wide receiver on the board left, fit the team perfectly, could be a deep threat at times, learn to get into that Deshaun Jackson role after he retires, but before then be a great slot receiver for Carson Wentz so that those tight ends don't have to do that all the time. Justin Jefferson's so versatile, so helpful for Carson Wentz. And then they passed on Jefferson. I don't get this pick at all. They end up picking instead Jalen Reagor. Not only not a better player than Justin Jefferson, but I would rank multiple other wide receivers between him and Justin Jefferson. Denzel Mims, Michael Pittman, Brandon Ayuk, who I think is also somewhat overrated. Multiple other players. Maybe just those, maybe even KJ Hamler. I might rank KJ Hamler above them. I think they're comparable. I would not pick one long before I would pick the other at the very least. Rager's probably better, but I see him more as a mid-second round pick than reaching all the way from pick 21 to get him. I don't get it. He's not going to be the short-term Deshaun Jackson because Deshaun Jackson is there for Philadelphia. So I don't get the pick. JP Donovan says, I'm still not sure why the Niners didn't grab Lamb. That's understandable. I'll go ahead and go back to this for a minute. I could definitely see that would be the better pick at that point. It might be the better pick, but I hope I explain. I'm not the best at explaining that situation. Again, go watch Brett's videos. He's a great YouTuber, great at talking about this stuff. He explained it better than I could, and I don't know if it's the right pick, but I think it's at least understandable picking Javon Kinlaw in that situation. I might have picked CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy even instead, but I think it is an understandable pick. So, 21 to Philadelphia Eagles, again, huge mistake with Jalen Reagor. I don't think this was the right pick ever in the situation, no matter what 20 players went off the board instead. So, when you get to pick 22 in the Minnesota Vikings, Justin Jefferson falls right into their lap. And, well, yeah, it makes perfect sense for them to pick Jets instead. I think they were pretty happy choice, and now they get maybe the best compliment on the board. Jeudy would probably be a better compliment, but best compliment they could hope for on the board, and a great Stephon Diggs replacement with the pick they traded Stephon Diggs for. Justin Jefferson's going to be great with the Minnesota Vikings. He's going to be very successful there. Great number 2 option, great compliment for Thielen, and he's going to fit very well within that offense and with Kirk Cousins. I thought it was a great pick, probably the best pick for the Vikings. Moving on to pick 23, the second trade of the draft. There were a lot of trades in this back half of the first round. It was originally the New England Patriots, but they traded down with the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Los Angeles Chargers are now picking at pick 23. And this is a pick I like a lot more than the Justin Herbert pick. They pick Kenneth Murray. I'm a little bit higher on Kenneth Murray than a lot of other people are. I think he's more of a mid-round one type of guy. I think he should have gone maybe closer to 17, 18. He goes at 23 instead. He falls a little bit, and the Chargers trade up to go get him. I think it's a pretty good pick. And I think he complements very well with Derwin James. They couldn't get Isaiah Simmons to be a true transformative player on defense to pair with Derwin James. But I think Kenneth Murray is not a bad discount version of that. This makes the defense very solid down the middle. He very easily might end up playing middle linebacker, of course, Derwin James playing safety. And you have really a very interesting key, solid young player at all three levels of the defense that makes the defense fun to watch no matter what part of the field you like to watch the most. Of course, on the defensive line, Joey Bosa, him at linebacker, and then Derwin James at safety. So a great defense that I think got better with this pick, and I think it's a very good pick in the long run to help with Justin Herbert. I don't think he was the right choice, but if you're going to pick him, you might as well build around him. So pick 24, the New Orleans Saints, another big head scratcher to me. They pick Cesar Ruiz, interior offensive lineman. I don't get it. I think this was a terrible pick. Not the worst pick in the draft, in my opinion. I'm a little biased. I'll get to that one in a little bit. But a really bad pick for a few reasons. First off, there's the fact that Christian Fulton was still on the board. Christian Fulton, in my opinion, was the third best cornerback in this class. He should have gone at 17. He should have gone at somewhere before now. In my mocks, the first two mocks I had, I mocked him specifically to New Orleans. He should not be falling past New Orleans. In my third mock, I ended up mocking him to Minnesota after the Minnesota for Buffalo trade. I didn't mock New Orleans to pick them only because he wasn't there. If he falls to 24, New Orleans should always get Christian Fulton. They are desperately in need long-term for a second cornerback to pair with Marshawn Lattimore. Desperately in need. Their CB2 last year was Janoris Jenkins, which is a Band-Aid at that position. He was solid. He was fine. They don't have Eli Apple anymore, and he was more of a liability. But they are in desperate need for an actual second cornerback. And Christian Fulton, in the long term, maybe he doesn't start week one. Maybe he doesn't start year one. That's not necessary. Maybe you can get another year of Janoris Jenkins. He can play the nickel. He can play whatever, and it'll be fine. But in the future, he is the future with a tandem with Marshawn Lattimore, and that defense can be truly elite with that tandem at cornerback. But instead, they pick an offensive line. Why? Offensive line's not as big of a need as cornerback. I mean, obviously picking offensive linemen in general is not a bad thing, but it wasn't the biggest need for New Orleans. It's nice for the future, but New Orleans is more of a team that wants to win right now. Christian Fulton's the guy that can help them maybe win right now, at least maybe as a nickel corner or as a rotational player year one. I don't think Cesar Ruiz is that. And that leads to the other problem. Cesar Ruiz was not the best offensive lineman on the board left. He wasn't even the best interior offensive lineman on the board left. There weren't any picked. I would rate Tyler Biadasz from Wisconsin. I can't pronounce that perfectly. I apologize. And Lloyd Cushenberry, both above him. None of them are round one picks, but I don't think he was even the best at this position for the Saints. I just don't get why they would make this pick. Moving on to pick 25, the San Francisco 49ers, who traded up with the Vikings with their only mid-round pick, the fourth they acquired from trading down one pick with the Bucs earlier in the draft, to pick Brandon Ayuk. So this pick, I think, is a bit of a reach. I would rank a few wide receivers left on the board above him, but I think he'll be a heavy contributor to them in year one, a team with a very young wide receiver core. And they were in desperate need for a wide receiver help. I probably would have taken someone like Mims, Higgins, or Pittman instead, but I still feel like this is a fine pick for them. They liked him a lot. Apparently, they were looking to pick him maybe even at 14 if Kinlaw wasn't there, which I think would be a mistake for sure, especially with Lamb and Judy still both on the board at 14. I think that'd be an awful pick. But it's fine at 25. Not the best pick. Not the best pick at the position, but it's a heavy need for them. And if they're going to utilize him well, and I think they will utilize him well, I think it'll be fine at 25. So, moving on to pick number 26 in the Green Bay Packers. So, first off, they've traded up with the Miami Dolphins from pick 30, giving up a 4th-round pick. So, before I start with this, I just want to make it super clear because my talk about this is going to be very biased. Because I am a Green Bay Packers fan. I haven't talked about my own fandom, I guess, within the NFL aspect of things much. I've mentioned it before when I talked about Green Bay that, this is the team I root for, this is my favorite team. But it's never been super important to talk about before now. This is super important because I'm going to rant for a little bit about this pick because in ways that I probably wouldn't if I wasn't such a big fan of this team. So, the Green Bay Packers selected, of course, trading up 4 picks, Jordan Love, the quarterback from Utah State. This is, in my opinion, the worst pick of the entire draft, and Green Bay's draft did not get much better from this afterwards. So, I have a lot of problems with this. I'm going to go ahead and start with this because this is the kind of subjective, the exterior. That's not really why I don't like this pick, although there is a lot of this. So a lot of people compare this to, of course, the time when Aaron Rodgers was picked by the Green Bay Packers at pick 24 back in 2005, when Brett Favre was 35 years old. Of course, Aaron Rodgers is 37, and they're comparing this pick to that pick, and that as kind of an explanation as to why this pick is okay. But there are multiple problems with that. First off, Aaron Rodgers this past season looked much better than Brett Favre did in his age 35 season. Brett Favre did not look great. Aaron Rodgers just led his team to a 13-win season and an NFC Championship appearance. Maybe a somewhat undeserving 13-win season and an NFC Championship appearance. But it's pretty obvious when you look at Aaron Rodgers right now that if you fill the holes that this team has, and this team has a lot of holes, offensive line, wide receiver, inside linebacker are the big ones, as well as secondary to a certain extent. If you fill those holes in the draft and in the offseason, this team has still a Super Bowl window with Aaron Rodgers. That I don't think was very true when Brett Favre was 35 and when they picked Aaron Rodgers back in 2005. Of course, Aaron Rodgers is 2 years older than Brett Favre, so maybe that window isn't very big. Maybe it's only 2 years. But when you're on the twilight of a Super Bowl window and a Hall of Fame quarterback career, in the first round, you don't pick a quarterback. You pick someone to fill a massive hole. That's what you do. Aaron Rodgers is not done competing at a high level. He's not the same Aaron Rodgers that he was a decade ago or 7 years ago or 6 years ago, but he is still good enough to lead this team to a ring if you draft around him the right way. And this is not the way to do it. The other problem with this pick is the fact that Jordan Love is not Aaron Rodgers. In 2005, Aaron Rodgers was seen as, if I recall correctly, one of the best quarterbacks in the class, and the fact that he fell to 24 in the first place was a surprise. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's my recollection. So him falling to 24, yeah, definitely worth it. That was huge value. My guess is Green Bay sees Jordan Love as a similar situation, but I don't see the same thing. Jordan Love is not worth the 24th pick at all, the 26th pick, at all. He's not worth a first-round pick. I didn't think Justin Herbert was worth a first-round pick. I might even rank Jalen Hurts above him. I don't even know if he's the best quarterback on the board at this point. It was a huge, huge reach. Maybe even bigger than the Justin Herbert one, although that one was bad. Jordan Love is not the level of quarterback to be picking in the first round, and he's certainly not the level of quarterback to be picking after a trade up in the first round. So that's one big problem. The bigger problem is just the players that were left on the board. So at pick 30, there would have still been Denzel Mims. There still would have been Josh Jones. There still would have been Ezra Cleveland. And there still would have been, there would not have been Patrick Queen. Patrick Queen got picked at 28. But if they were to trade up, assuming they traded up anyway, all four of those players would have been so much more valuable to the team than the player they picked in Jordan Love. Because all four of those players are players that are around worth this stock. I think Patrick Queen is a little bit overrated. I don't think Ezra Cleveland is quite worth that pick. But at 26, all four of those players would have filled a major need, been contributors in their early careers, maybe not starters necessarily, but by year two, probably starters and maybe rotational players. And all of them would have contributed to help build for a Super Bowl run in these next couple of years. Instead, they didn't just pick a quarterback that is not going to help them for the rest of Aaron Rodgers' career. They traded up, giving up a fourth-round pick in a draft. Keep in mind, this is one of the worst wide receiver rosters in the NFL. You have Devontae Adams in no depth, no reliability. And you have one of the best drafts for wide receiver depth and reliability in the history of the NFL. And you give up a fourth-round pick to go and not fill one of your holes. Instead, you could have spent that fourth-round pick on a wide receiver that could have started above your second-best wide receiver potentially this year. And instead, you picked Jordan Love, and they traded up to do it, and I don't understand. A quick side note, again, I'm not talking about much of the later rounds, but I think it's worth mentioning here. They traded up 4 picks for Jordan Love in the first round from 30 to 26. But later in the second round, they decided to not trade up 3 picks for Denzel Mims, who fell to 59. Denzel Mims, I rated as a late round 1 player. He'd probably end up falling to the early second, but if he's there at 30 for the Packers, I would have been more than happy with picking Denzel Mims. I ended up mocking him to 25 to the Vikings. Of course, makes sense they wouldn't pick him with Justin Jefferson falling to 22. But well worth the pick at 30. And if you can trade up just a few picks to go get him from 62, that is more than enough value in order to do so. Maybe spend that fourth round pick on. Maybe not that much of a trade up, but whatever. The point is, they could have used the same or fewer resources to go get better value with Denzel Mims at 59. And instead they pick Jordan Love. And at 62, they pick A.J. Dillon. A compliment for Aaron Jones. Again, instead of filling the hole at offensive line, Josh Jones was still there. Both Denzel Mims and Josh Jones were still there. Well, no, Denzel Mims was at 59, but you get that. And Josh Jones was still there at their second round pick. Instead of doing that, which maybe not the best thing, but worth the value for sure, or filling the massive hole at linebacker, or filling the massive hole at wide receiver too. Instead, they pick A.J. Dillon. Aaron Jones was great last year, and Jamal Williams was a fine compliment. They don't need A.J. Dillon. Then they pick a tight end in the third round, and they pick 0 wide receivers in the best wide receiver draft class, maybe in the history of the NFL. I don't understand it at all. I know I'm biased towards this a little bit, but it is, in my opinion, the worst pick of the entire first round. Moving on to the 27th pick of the draft in the Seattle Seahawks. They picked Jordan Brooks, and this feels pedestrian compared to the pick I just talked about, but I think this is actually a pretty big reach as well. I don't like this pick either. He won't be playing inside linebacker, which, if I recall correctly, is his starting position in college. He won't be playing inside linebacker with Bobby Wagner there. So I actually don't get this pick in the slightest. I understand getting another linebacker, but I don't think he's worth the late round 1 pick. I think he's more of a mid round 2 pick. I think it was a pretty big reach, and they could have gotten better value. And speaking of players that I think were reaches as linebackers in the late first round, you have the Baltimore Ravens picking Patrick Queen. I've talked about Patrick Queen a lot recently. I think he's a pretty big reach in the first round, but it's understandable. Again, not nearly as bad of a pick as the Packers. Again, if the Packers traded up and picked Patrick Queen, I think it would have been a reach. I think I wouldn't have been a huge fan of it, but it's better than what we ended up doing. Ravens, similar situation. Linebackers are a pretty big need for them, so picking someone like that in the first round makes a lot of sense. I might rank Zach Bond over him. Would prefer the Zach Bond pick in the Ravens with the Baltimore Ravens, but I don't think it's a terrible pick. I think it's a pretty big reach, but I understand it given their situation. Moving on to pick 29 in the Tennessee Titans, they end up picking Isaiah Wilson, which I think also is a pretty big reach. I'd rank Josh Jones and Ezra Cleveland both above him, but he's a pretty good scheme fit with Derrick Henry and that Tennessee Titans offense, so I think it's a little bit more understandable considering that. So I understand, and I don't think it's too bad of a pick. Moving on to the pick 30, what was the Green Bay Packers pick? Of course, the Miami Dolphins traded with the Packers, traded down. And looking at the player they ended up picking, the fact that they traded down makes a lot of sense. They ended up picking Noah Igbenogany from Auburn. And I think this is a pretty big reach. I've talked about the above list of corners, right? Fulton, Gladney, Johnson, and Diggs. All still there. I would rank all four of them above Igbenogany. And, I mean, it'd be close, but I would say he's the fifth best corner left on the board at this point. I think this is a pretty big reach. Side note, why did Christian Fulton fall to the Titans at the end of the second round at pick 61? That's a massive steal for them to get, again, I think the third best corner on the board, and get near top flight talent at two of their bigger needs in offensive line and cornerback, and they got solid picks at both of them. I think Isaiah Wilson was a bit of a reach, but makes up for it with Christian Fulton being a massive steal. But yeah, the Miami Dolphins get a decent player to pick to pair with Austin Jackson and, of course, Tua. He can, learn from Byron Jones, and I think it'll be fine. A bit of a reach, pretty big reach, but not a terrible pick from the Dolphins either. Moving on to pick 31, the Minnesota Vikings, a trade with the 49ers, of course, to have this pick instead of pick 25, getting a fourth rounder out of it. And they picked Jeff Gladney. So cornerback, that makes a little bit more sense than Noah Igbenogany. I think he's better than Noah Igbenogany. But still, not Fulton. I don't get it. I think the only reason you don't pick Fulton at 22 in the first place is because Justin Jefferson is there. But it fills a need. It's a fine pick here. Not a bad pick from the Vikings. No real complaints other than maybe opportunity cost. And finally, pick 32, the Kansas City Chiefs select Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the fifth LSU Tiger, the 15th SEC player to be picked in the first round, and an amazing pick for the Kansas City Chiefs. I talked about Clyde a good bit in my specific LSU video. And I said that I didn't think he would be picked in the first round. I thought he could even fall to something like day 3, not because he isn't worth a pick like that, but because he's a running back, which generally isn't very valuable for most teams early in drafts. And he is a little bit undersized and probably isn't the top running back in the class, maybe even as low as number 4, behind Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, and J.K. Dobbins. But I also said that there was one team that could pick a running back in this first round. The Kansas City Chiefs at pick 32 could pick a running back. I thought if they would do that, it would be DeAndre Swift. But apparently, they had other plans. And they instead picked, of course, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I think this is an amazing pick for them. I think he fits the system absolutely perfectly. He's one of the hardest workers in the draft class from all accounts. He's, out of the entire class, the first guy that Patrick Mahomes wanted, which there might not be a bigger seal of approval in the draft. And from an outside NFL perspective, this is terrifying. The Kansas City Chiefs offense was unstoppable last year in the playoffs. They spotted the Houston Texans 24, still beat them by 20. Were down 10 points in all 3 of their playoff games, and of course won all 3 of their playoff games by 10-plus points. And it's an amazing team that just got a whole lot better. The Chiefs did not have a great run game. Damian Williams is okay, but Clyde fills that void entirely, is a perfect fit with them, caught an LSU record 55 receptions last season with the Tigers. He already understands an NFL system with Joe Brady and the Saints. Fits the team perfectly, is an amazing weapon to pair in that backfield with Patrick Mahomes. And again, from somebody who watched a lot of LSU last year, I can guarantee he is a different sort of player that will make the Chiefs, again, compete as Super Bowl favorites going into the season. So that is it from this week and the first round draft overview and review from from the first round. I hope you enjoyed. Now, next week is going to be the final episode of the series. Is not going to be an NFL episode. I'm not going to be talking about that. I'm going to be talking about Vanderbilt sports, of course, what most of this series was talking about, Terrier talk. And it's going to be the final episode. I'm going to do a year overview, talk about the best moments, the best games from this year, all sporting events from Vanderbilt. I'm probably going to have someone on talking about, what we missed from the spring sports and school in general from these past few months. And it'll be a farewell. Now it won't be the last video from this channel. Won't upload probably for a little bit, but when we get closer to football season, assuming it happens, hoping it happens, I will start doing videos talking about college football and the NFL when we get closer to that. But for now, that is probably going to be it. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you hopefully next week. Same time, same channel for the last episode, the series finale of Terrier Talk. I will see you then.